Wind whistled eerily through the trees as we all sat huddled around the dying campfire. Wrapped in thick wool blankets, we sipped steaming mugs of hot chocolate, seeking warmth and comfort while flames danced and crackled before us. I have one more good scary story before we all turn in for the night, my friend Katie announced, her eyes glinting mischievously in the firelight. We all groaned, knowing her tales tended to be on the freakier side. But there was no resisting Katie's sinister campfire stories once she got going. It's called The Backseat Driver, and it takes place on a twisted, isolated road deep in a forest kind of like this one. She continued with building creepiness. Shivering, I pulled my blanket tighter around me. The looming trees encircling our small camp were pitch black and dripping with menace in the night. Our fire seemed like a lone beacon warding off unseen evils. Clearing her throat, Katie began her haunting tale. A young woman named Emmy was driving home alone late one night along a desolate forest highway. It was her usual route back from visiting her long-distance boyfriend, but she never felt fully at ease on the remote road. With no street lights and rarely another car passing by, the tree-lined route was dark and eerie. I could envision that lonely, winding road all too vividly. The surrounding forests seemed to close in as Katie continued. As Emmy navigated a particularly sharp curve, her eyes flickered to the rearview mirror for just a moment. But that fleeting glance sent a chill down her spine, because reflected in the mirror was the silhouette of a dark figure sitting in her back seat, barely visible in the shadows. We gasped in unison, picturing the sinister, unexpected passenger. As Katie described Emmy's growing alarm and panic, the wind picked up, whistling through the branches and making the trees creak and groan ominously all around us. Heart pounding, Emmy considered pulling over and making a run for it. But she was at least 30 miles from the nearest town. Attempting to flee into the pitch-black forest on foot seemed like a death sentence. The only choice was to keep driving and get to safety. Katie's voice dropped to an intense whisper as she described the mounting tension. I could almost put myself in Emmy's shoes, imagining that terror of being stalked on a secluded backroad. Emmy turned on the interior car light and checked the backseat again. Indeed, someone, or something, was crouched down behind the driver's seat, obscured in shadow. She caught a glimpse of matted hair and what looked like a knife clutched in its hand. I shuddered despite the roaring fire mere feet away. Our group was enthralled, hanging on to Katie's every chilling word. Frantically, Amy tried calling 911 but got no signal. Miles of remote forest lay between her and help. Fighting back panic, she hit the gas hard, speeding recklessly around each curve, praying she wouldn't crash. All the while, she could hear faint movements from the backseat. A creeping, skittering sound. That thing was still lurking there, hidden from sight. The wind continued thrashing the trees aggressively. Katie synchronized her story's tension expertly with the night's natural soundtrack. Finally, Amy saw lights ahead indicating town. Relief washed over her, even as her unwanted passenger continued rustling behind her. Once she hit Main Street, she pulled into the police station, honking her horn and screaming for help. We awaited the big reveal, poised on the edges of our makeshift log seats. Katie smiled wickedly, drawing out the suspense. Officers came rushing out, guns raised. Emmy leaped from the car, yelling that someone was in her backseat. The cops cautiously approached and found her attacker. A mangy raccoon was crouched on the floor, hissing and baring its tiny teeth. We burst out laughing, the tension giving way to comic relief. Katie joined in gleefully. Terrified of a raccoon, can you believe it? Poor Emmy was so shaken up, but grateful it wasn't anything more sinister. The officers helped remove the aggressive critter from her car so she could finally head home, exhausted but relieved. However, to this day, Emmy still dreads driving that dark, lonely stretch of road through the forest. Because sometimes our imagination conjures far more disturbing threats than reality. We applauded Katie's spooky yet humorous tale as she gave an exaggerated bow. The night suddenly seemed less oppressive, the shadows less threatening. Exhausted from the adrenaline of an evening packed with ghost stories, we put out the fire and crawled into our tents. but as I settled onto my sleeping bag, the wind continued howling outside, making the tarp walls shudder and flap. Katie's dramatic storytelling had stirred up my childhood phobia of the dark. I couldn't shake the image of a deranged attacker crouched just out of sight, waiting to strike. Every little noise made me flinch. The scurrying of a night creature through dry leaves, the hoot of an owl, the rhythmic creaking of tree boughs rubbing together. I tossed and turned, struggling to sleep despite my fatigue. When the first rays of sunlight finally peeked through the canvas, I breathed a huge sigh of relief. The night was over, and our cozy campsite returned as dawn's rosy glow washed away the shadows. Crawling out of my tent, I stretched and inhaled the crisp morning air. The woods now seemed serene rather than threatening. Birds twittered cheerfully overhead as the trees swayed gently in the breeze. My friends emerged from their tents looking equally ragged. Based on their groggy expressions, I don't think any of us got much quality rest. "Rough night, guys?" I asked, stifling a yawn. Yeah, I kept imagining that creepy raccoon was crawling all over me in my sleep," Lily said with an exaggerated shiver. The others chuckled knowingly. Katie's chilling story had apparently haunted us all in the midnight darkness. Her smug smile indicated she took pride in keeping us up. We quickly packed up our gear and hit the road home, eager for cozy beds and a sense of safety. Looking back, I can admit our hyperactive imaginations got the best of us last night. But even now, driving along remote roads flanked by looming, shadowy trees, I still get that primal twitch of unease. Glancing into the rearview mirror, half expecting to glimpse a dark figure crouched just out of sight, biding its time. Though I know it's just my mind playing tricks, some fears sink too deep to ever fully shake, no matter how irrational in the light of day. The ghosts conjured by night's cloak of darkness never totally fade back into fantasy or fiction. Especially after a perfectly crafted campfire tale of terror told just right to awaken lingering phobias within us all. The fear of dark roads through the forest, and what might be silently stalking us from the shadows. The wind whipped violently through the trees, making the branches creak and groan as we all huddled near the campfire. Eager yet uneasy expressions flickered across my friends' faces in the firelight as they anticipated the bone-chilling tale I was about to tell. Leaning in close to build the suspense, I whispered, "Beware the backwoods butcher. He's out there roaming these very forests, ceaselessly searching for his next victims." My friends gasped, their eyes going wide. The flames crackled, sending wisps of smoke swirling up into the black sky dotted with stars. Somewhere nearby, an owl hooted, further setting the mood. Locals say he's a grizzled man, face covered in scars, with wild eyes that gleam with madness. I continued slowly and ominously. He stalks the most remote trails wielding a massive rusted butcher knife caked in old bloodstains from his previous prey. The wind kicked up again with a low, keening cry that sent shivers down our spines. I mimicked the glinting knife and crazed eyes to my enthralled friends. Jake gulped loudly. Hikers have reported coming across abandoned campsites recently that were utterly ransacked. Tents shredded and mats slashed. All the supplies picked clean and scattered around haphazardly, nothing of value left behind. I could see my friends getting wrapped up in the creepy scenario, eyes darting around our own camp nervously. Lowering my voice further, I continued. And that's not all. Some of the torn tents were stained with fresh drops of blood. Not a lot, but enough to know violence took place there. The fire snapped loudly right on cue, making us all jump. I smiled inwardly, knowing my timing was perfect. Olivia and Lily gripped each other tightly. The unfortunate hikers those sites belonged to were never heard from again. I pressed on. Local authorities searched the nearby forests extensively, but never found any trace of the missing campers. Their bodies have simply vanished, taken by the backwoods butcher, to be disposed of in gruesome ways. I swiped my finger across my throat for added drama. My friends looked properly disturbed now, faces pale in the flickering firelight. Legend says the grizzled butcher lives deep in these woods in a ramshackle cabin hidden down a nearly invisible overgrown trail, I whispered harshly. His lair is supposedly filled with the bones, teeth, and belongings of his many victims grotesquely displayed as macabre trophies. I grinned wickedly. The wind had died down now, leaving a heavy silence hanging over the campsite. Only the crackling fire punctuated the quiet as we all absorbed this chilling scenario. They say the backwoods butcher continues claiming victims to this day, I concluded ominously. Hunting tirelessly through every remote trail and campground, never satisfied. So many have vanished in these parts, never to be seen again. Because no one who encounters that madman ever lives to tell the tale. Trailing off, I sat back and let the grim implications of my tale sink in. A tense hush fell over the group, only the shifting flames making a sound. We all turned in early that night, extinguishing the fire and zipping ourselves up tightly in our tents, as if thin nylon could protect us from the deranged killer I had vividly brought to life. Safe in my sleeping bag, I was nonetheless haunted by vivid visions of a wild-eyed psycho crashing through the brush, his massive knife glinting in the moonlight. Every little noise put me on high alert. When the first birds began twittering at sunrise, I finally drifted off, exhausted from a night of hypervigilance. Emerging from my tent, I saw the others looked equally worn out. Dark half-moons hung under Lily's eyes. Not gonna lie, I barely slept a wink thinking about that creepy butcher guy lurking around, Max said with a yawn. Murmurs of agreement passed through the group as we packed up. The morning bird song and glowing sunlight made the previous night's tale seem silly now. Nonetheless, we chose to hit the road early, relieved to leave the remote campgrounds behind for the comforts of civilization. Yet even back in the safety of my apartment, the story lingered. Whenever I'm hiking and the tree cover gets thick, shadows rising on all sides, I picture a ragged madman with wild eyes peering out from behind a trunk, waiting for lone stragglers to pick off. It's irrational, I know, just a late-night fireside story gone to my head. Still, I find myself constantly glancing over my shoulder on the trail, unable to shake the uneasy feeling of being watched by something sinister hiding in the forest depths. Because sometimes stories plant seeds that gradually take root in our fertile imaginations, where they refuse to be uprooted by logic or daylight. So now, I stick to more light-hearted fare when telling campfire tales. Some legends are better left unconjured, especially with night pressing close, while shadows dance in the flames. Restless spirits have ways of springing to life when beckoned by the right storyteller in the right mood of mystery. And once called forth, we lose control of the darkness we've unleashed. The backwoods butcher may have been only a phantom before I gave him form around that fire. But phantoms have a way of persisting, their roots reaching into unseen worlds that defy reason. Some tales can never be untold. An imagined killer can cast as long a shadow as any flesh and blood monster. Mystery breeds monsters, and I armed the darkness that night. Shadows danced and writhed around us as we all huddled near the glowing campfire. It was nearly midnight, the witching hour, and time for me to spin my most bone-chilling tale yet. Beware the buck-knife butcher, I warned in a harsh, urgent whisper. He stalks these very woods, ceaselessly searching for victims to satisfy his vile, twisted edges. My friends leaned in, eyes wide with mingled curiosity and dread. The fire crackled, sending flickering light dancing across our rapt faces. Lowering my voice further, I continued the grim tale. They say he's a massive hulk of a man, silent as a shadow, face hidden beneath a frayed burlap hood. But beneath, his features are horribly disfigured, the skin ripped and scarred into a grotesque mask. I mimicked a terrifying visage, eliciting some gasps. The wind picked up then, whistling through the trees and making the branches creak and groan ominously. The butcher roams the forest wielding a huge hunting knife nearly the length of your arm. The blade hacked and stained with the blood of countless victims foolish enough to cross his path. I grasped an imaginary knife and swung it violently through the air for emphasis. My captive audience recoiled in fearful excitement. They say he strikes without warning, emerging from the thicket to slash throats before his victims can even scream. His enormous hand clamps over their mouths while his knife flashes, too swift to stop. I vividly acted out the gruesome attack to audible groans and nervous laughter. My timing with the wind was perfect for maximum effect. Olivia clutched Knox's arm tightly. Then, as quickly as he struck, the butcher vanishes back into the dense woods, leaving his latest mutilated corpse behind like a discarded ragdoll. Some have survived close calls, only to be forever haunted by the sight of that wielding knife slicing the darkness, closer and closer. I let the grim implications hang there, the only sound the shifting fire casting monstrous shadows onto the trees. The woods pressed in like a suffocating shroud. With morbid relish, I described the butcher's ritual of displaying the bodies of those he slayed. Deep in the forest, hikers have come across macabre scenes. Suspended from ropes between trees, or impaled on branches, or carefully posed atop mossy boulders. Their throats slashed, scarlet spilling down their necks. Sightless eyes bulging in frozen horror at the butcher's handiwork. My enthralled friends squirmed with dread, fully immersed in my shocking tale. I could see their minds racing, picturing stumbling upon the gory scenes I described. The woods creaked and groaned. Some nights, if you listen very closely, you can hear the sound of steel rhythmically scraping stone, I rasped. Off in the deep forest, the butcher sits by his fire pit for hours, patiently sharpening his monstrous knife. The shick, shick, shick echoes between the trees, an ominous warning of horrors to come. I demonstrated the eerie sound by drawing my own pocket knife across a stone, sending shivers down spines. By now, the wind had picked up to a banshee's howl. Shadows twisted violently in the firelight as I concluded my grim tale. So beware the woods after dark, friends, for the buck-knife butcher never sleeps, never rests. Just endlessly stalks between the ancient pines, blade hungering for blood and breath. His crazed urges never satisfied, no matter how many throats he slices. A heavy silence hung over the campsite after I finished. Only shifting flames punctuated the tense quiet. My friend's eyes remained fixed on the encroaching tree line, certain that at any moment our doom would come lumbering out of the inky woods. None of us got much sleep that night, tossing and turning to the soundtrack of snapping twigs and ominous forest groans. Visions of an enormous hooded figure with blade flashing haunted me each time I dared close my eyes. When morning finally came, we wasted no time packing up camp and getting the hell out of those deep woods. Back in the safety of civilization, logic convinced me the butcher was just a bit of lurid fiction I'd brought to life too vividly. But the primal fear never fully retreats. Anytime I'm out among remote trees and swirling mist, I find myself scanning for hulking shadows stalking silently between trunks, listening for the telltale rasp of steel on stone drifting through the forest, closer and closer. Campfire tales have a way of planting seeds in our fertile imaginations that become firmly rooted. And once conjured, certain horrors refuse to be dismissed by rational thought and sunlight. So I'm more careful with my stories now when night falls heavy around the flames, for the darkness always listens, ready to birth our deepest dreads and give form to the fiends we unwittingly beckon. Restless spirits of the forest are best left unstirred, especially by reckless story spinners indulging macabre fascinations. There are reasons some legends linger long after their truth grows hazy and lost to memory. The butcher may have been born solely of lurid words and moonlit unease, but phantoms have ways of persisting, feeding silently on mystery and the mind's eye. There are dark shapes carving their way between the shadowed pines even now, patiently biding their time, waiting to step fully formed from the murk when called by the right words at the right fireside. For once given flesh, the knives we conjure never lose their thirst for blood.